Werewolves. Where did you first learn of them? The Wolfman? Twilight? Or maybe like today's book, you just happen to live in Florida? Well, in any case, the legends continue in today's book, The Werewolf of Fever Swamp. The Werewolf of Fever Swamp has one of the most classic covers in the series. So much so that whenever this landfill company Funko decided to make Goosebumps merch, this book was the only one to get the full cover treatment. I can't deny this one is truly classic. The cool vibrant colors, the moon perfectly placed to grab your attention and bring that same attention to our werewolf in the foreground. Amazing stuff. Our taglines are, "Who's afraid of the big bad wolf?" and "What big teeth you have?" The same can't really be said for our UK cover. Not that it's bad, it's just, well, a bit goofy. Instead of the wolf, my attention is on this kid and his smug expression. I think he's got one of the wolf's ears for himself, too. I just don't think human faces are really the best subjects for a Goosebumps cover, and the UK has a lot of them. Next is our 2000s reprint, as always a little zoomed in, and the slime is much darker gray than a purple. Lastly is our classic print, and Dorman's illustration still has some beautiful colors going on. The wolf looks a lot more like a werewolf now, too. But do you see that? Bonus features! This one has a quiz on surviving the swamp, strange occurrences on full moons, and my favorite, the splat stats. It's not really as strong as an attacker as I'd expect, but the speed? A 10 out of 10? In the Goosebumps world? Screw it. He's faster than Goku. Now, I said that was the last one, but we actually have a comic book adaptation. It's the first story printed in Creepy Creatures, and I'll blue ball you guys on the art for now. An unfortunate spoiler, this comic, like most, has little changed. A waste of a whole transition and new gameplay footage for me to record, if you ask me. So I'll be adding in some photos of the art at their necessary parts in the summary. And it looks great, too. So with that said, let's get to the summary. So, like I mentioned in the intro, this book takes place in Florida. Today's Goose Boy is Grady, whose family decided to move here during Christmas break, and they live right next to the swamp. Grady wanted to do some great swamp exploration, fun I'm sure, but all the howling at night feels like a warning. The reason his family has moved to this hellhole is because Dad's a scientist, and despite working at the University of Vermont, his experiment is to see if the South American swamp deer can live in the swamps of Florida. Now, if you watching are a zoologist or autistic like me, you may have figured out that swamp deer aren't from South America. They're from India, and are called Barasinga. Stein is conflating these guys with the marsh deer, which are actually from South America. Of course, he's either deliberately or not using the term swamp interchangeably with a marsh. Trust me, I thought they were the same too. Make sure to like and subscribe for more awesome tangents. So these deer caused a move that surprised everyone. Mom is conveniently also a scientist, so she didn't care. But Emily got it the worst. She's Grady's 16-year-old sister, and she had to miss her senior year of high school for this. Was it worth losing friends and memories to go to Florida? Who knows? At least this swampy living situation isn't in solitude. There's a few other houses here. Grady uses his newfangled binoculars to look into the swamp and he sees a bird. A crane, specifically. Emily lets him know. Grady wants to follow it and Emily really doesn't want to. She's waiting for a love letter from her boyfriend back home. But Dad appears to give a shove towards the plot and off we go to the swamp. So you wouldn't believe it, but the swamp is hot as balls. And loud. And itchy. They pass by bugs, lizards, some nice ponds, but eventually Grady walks through a clearing of sorts, spotting a new pond to ponder. Haha. He runs over to it and sees that it's less like water and more like a gurgling dark green soup. Emily yells out, "Quicksand!" and then Grady is shoved from behind. But then Emily grabs him before he can fall in. What a joke. Even funnier, she goes on to explain this isn't actually quicksand, but a bog. A peat bog, to be exact. Why don't you drink some and see how it tastes? Emily tries to push Grady again, but he dodges. I'm not thirsty. Even Grady thinks that reply sucks, but it's about time to go back home. It's hot. They walk for several minutes before realizing that they're lost. So Emily starts to freak out. She's not good in emergencies. Grady's the calm one in the family, so he tries some ideas. Check the position of the sun. A roof of trees in the way. Check the moss. It always grows in the north. Or was it east? Or west? He doesn't even know what moss looks like. No compass, none of those radio transmitters that the deer have on them. How about going back up the hill to see the sunlight? But where is that hill anyway? Well, they're screwed. Not gonna lie, I don't know how knowing their cardinal direction for a moment would help, but I'm not a navigator. So they just decide to walk in a direction and hope it goes somewhere. Eventually it leads right to the bog from before. Perfect! Now on the right path, they both run home. But then, someone grabs Grady's ankle. Blood. Screaming. It's got me! But then Grady sees Emily's laughing, pointing at the culprit, which is just a raised tree root. And the blood? Well, Grady bit his lip. From now on, Emily keeps a slow and steady pace with him. They notice some god rays poking through the trees, and they realize they still aren't going the right way. But they do find a clearing, one dotted with tons of enormous mushrooms and a small shack. Did I start reading Hansel and Gretel by accident? The shack is low to the ground, only about as tall as Grady himself, and there are work boots, tin cans, water bottles. In my mind, I imagine the 7 dwarves, a green hag, an old ranger. In their minds, they imagine a criminal, a murderer, a real Florida man, perhaps. So the first thing they do with the possibility of a murderer is yell out to see if he's home. No answer, so Grady reaches for the doorknob. Except before he can, the door swings open. The man is described as, let's just say, Gaston, if he somehow lived, moved to Florida, got old, and never cleaned himself anymore. Grady wants to ask him a whole bunch of things, but Emily has already started to book it. Grady scrambles along to catch up, and the man's chasing after. So the chase is on, and Grady would love to stop and look at all the cool swamp vegetation, but there's no time. Eventually, they lose the guy, and coincidentally, they ran right back where they came from. Home at last. They tell Mom and Dad everything, and Dad does admit the town's been mentioning an old swamp hermit out there, but he's supposedly harmless. Why did he chase them? Moving ahead to dinner, Dad tells stories about the process of getting the deer here, which sounds traumatizing, but no time to worry about that. You know the swamp? Well, it's actually called Fever Swamp. Why? We have no clue. After dinner, Grady goes outside to mope a little about being homesick. He misses his friends, who are probably having a great old time together right now. He decides to just go watch TV, but a shoulder grab gets him. The hermit! But it's not the hermit, it's some random kid. He lives 2 doors down, and his name is Will Blake. He looks like a linebacker, but he's also 12, like Grady. Apparently there's one more 12-year-old in this town, but she's a girl, and she's weird, too. The conversation quickly becomes about the swamp, and Grady asks if Will knows why it's called Fever Swamp. Legend says that 100 years ago, or longer, everyone in town who went to the swamp came down with a fever. It lasted weeks, or months, and it was pretty fatal, too. Those who didn't die from it went crazy, and now they call it Fever Swamp. Cool. Grady asks if he knows about the hermit, but he's never seen him. Maybe they can go walking through the swamp together sometime, but it's time to go back home. Wow, a new friend already. Maybe this Florida place ain't so bad after all. Grady heads inside and notices that he isn't really starting to feel good. Mom gives him the old hand on the forehead approach and says, "Grady, I think you have a little fever." A few days pass and the fever comes and goes. At night, Grady has nightmares about the peat bog before being woken up by all this howling. Constant howling, and it's close by too, like right from the swamp. Grady makes his way to the kitchen before he hears a sound, a scratching, and then another howl. The fridge clicks on and almost gives Grady a heart attack. The scratching continues, and he almost makes it to the door before he realizes someone's breathing right beside him. The kitchen light flicks on, and it's Emily. She hears the howling too. They don't hear the scratching anymore. What could have done it? Another howl comes out, and Emily realizes that's gotta be a wolf. But that can't be right. Wolves don't live in swamps. Somebody tell Grady that they can. Scary. The scratching begins again, and Emily desperately wants to get Mom and Dad, but Grady, the calm and I suppose stupid one, doesn't care. He just wants to figure it out. So he pulls the door open, and nothing. Even with a full moon, Grady doesn't see shit. Emily begs him to come back inside, and Dad catches them once he does. He sentences them to bed, telling them that it's hard to get used to all the new sounds here, but they gotta do it. The fever puts Grady to sleep fast, right into another nightmare of sinking into the bog. In the morning, though, the fever's gone and the sky looks beautiful. Maybe Will want to go to the swamp today, so Grady steps outside, breathes in the fresh air, and immediately gets speared by an enormous monster. But no, this dog is not the dog Braun Breaker, but in fact an actual dog. It's enormous, and he has no collar. Maybe he's a stray, and maybe he's what scratched the door last night. What a convenient way to get a new pet! Mom and Dad are opposed, but Emily joins Grady's side. In any case, they all agree that the dog seems pretty nice. Will shows up and gets introduced to the family. He's never seen this dog either, but he comments that it looks more like a wolf than a dog. Interesting. Maybe this creature was making those howls last night. Howls that Will claims he never heard because he's quite the sound sleeper. Dad says that he could be part wolf, but he's definitely not just a wolf, so they name the dog Wolf. The name sticks right away and the dog responds to it well. Scooting ahead to the afternoon, Will and Grady are out exploring the swamp. They eventually talk about this great bog Grady loves to just dream about, and Grady asks if it really does suck you down like quicksand. To which Will says that his dad says that there is no such thing as quicksand, which is half true. Unfortunately, Grady still believes that you can get sucked down into the thing, which is the one half that Will's dad was right about. That can't happen, but quicksand is real. A couple more minutes of walking and Will stops, shushing Grady. Footsteps behind them. The swamp hermit. They quickly decide to hide. Will finds a place, but Grady's got no options. With nowhere to go, the killer approaches, but it's just Wolf. He must have a great nose to find them in here. Not only that, but he pushes ahead on the way to the bog. Maybe he's a swamp dog. They do make it to the bog, and Will throws a tree branch in. It doesn't move. Damn you, buoyancy! Grady goes to find something heavier, but he hears growling. Wolf is in attack position. Danger approaches. Something darts around on the other side of the bog. Is that the swamp hermit? It is. He's carrying a big sack, and are those stains on his shirt blood stains? Well, the guy leaves without saying anything, so Wolf and the boys calm down. They both nervously laugh, wondering what horrific things the hermit must be up to before deciding to go home. They make it all the way to the edge of the trees before Will stops. Grady moves his eyes to meet his gaze, and what they see will truly shock you. A bird, one of the ones that Grady saw back in the first chapter, torn apart. Will assumes the swamp hermit must have did it. He's a monster. Then Grady, the calm guy he is like, bro, calm down, he's just a weird old dude. Plus, there's clearly paw prints in the dirt. But a regular old dog wouldn't do this for sure. What a mystery. Both boys and Wolf head home. Grady tells Dad all about the horrific experiences, and he just says that it's part of nature. Stop making scary stuff up. Reasonable, I guess. At night, Wolf gets to sleep in Grady's room, and that makes him feel safe, but no matter what, that mangled body is all he can see in his head. This sounds like something that won't make the episode. Comforted by Wolf, he heads off to sleep, but then, a crash. Someone's breaking in. The whole family hears it, and they all meet in the hallway. Grady's the first one to make it downstairs, and it's Wolf. He knocked over a table and a lamp trying to get outside. Well, that's not good behavior. Looks like he'll have to stay outside from now on. Grady still wishes he had that safety from having Wolf sleep in his room, but this is what's best. Wolf is let out, disappearing into the night, and Dad cleans up the mess. Now we can all sleep in peace. Wrong! The howling starts again soon after, waking Grady back up. Then it sounds like footsteps, a struggle, right outside. He makes his way to the window just in time to see a huge creature running on all fours. It's just a blur in the darkness. What could it be? The howls are still going, and Grady sees something else. A few feet from the deer pen, it looks like a pile of rags. A closer look is needed, so Grady climbs out the window and makes his way over. What is that thing? Close enough to see it now, Grady begins to gag. A rabbit, frozen in fear, ripped open. Grady hurries his way back inside, and the howls continue. In the morning, Grady brings Dad to see the rabbit, and Wolf appears looking friendly as ever. Emily also appears, adamant that this dog is a monster. This pisses Grady off, but Dad also realizes the odds aren't in Wolf's favor here. Those howls definitely didn't sound like a dog though, so Dad decides everyone should just be a little bit more careful around Wolf from now on. Grady gives Wolf a big hug and is basically like, "Oh, you are so adorable, you aren't a monster. That wasn't you running away last night, was it?" And Wolf stares back at him hard, like he's trying to say something. No howls at night this time, and in the morning, Will is here to go do some more swamp exploration. On their trek, Will asks if Grady's heard about Mr. Warner. The Warners are the last house on the row, and Mr. Warner never came back from hunting turkeys in the swamp. He's a really good hunter too, so another mystery. A voice yells from behind, "Maybe the werewolves got him." Only took 80 pages, but we finally heard the word werewolf. And it wasn't the swamp hermit, but a girl. The so-called weird girl mentioned earlier, and her name is Cassie. She wholeheartedly believes that there's a werewolf in this swamp, and Will is really against that notion. They argue all the way to the bog, Grady third-wheeling the whole time. They make it to everyone's favorite bog by the time Cassie cries out, "The werewolf!" And she points right at Wolf. Except she's not pointing at Wolf, she's pointing at the swamp hermit. And the brown bag wasn't a bag, it was a turkey. So instantly, Grady's thought process is, oh my god, maybe the hermit is a werewolf, and he murdered Mr. Warner and took a turkey as his prize. Like, really? But it's enough to make him start thinking maybe the werewolf thing really is true. And before anyone can run, the hermit pops up from the weeds and yells, "I'm the werewolf!" He starts swinging the turkey around, laughing his ass off. Everyone starts running, but Grady's a few steps behind. He trips and falls into the mud hard. He's dead. No, not literally dead, but assumedly he will be from the werewolf chasing him. Grady's frozen in place, wondering where the hell Wolf went, but then the hermit approaches. Grady screams for help, but the old man just tells him to go. He was just messing with him. Then Wolf finally shows up. The hermit tells Grady to watch out for him and leaves without elaborating on that. So Grady starts walking back home, wondering what the hell that meant, and assuming all the werewolf business is just the hermit teasing him. And then he gets bit by a snake. I was waiting for something like this to happen. Snakes and swamps go hand in hand. Well, so do alligators, but none of those yet. Anyway, Grady crumples to the ground in pain, nearly passing out until he feels Wolf licking the wound. Yeah, that's definitely gonna help. Along with Wolf, Grady starts to limp back home, mistakenly saying that the snake could be poisonous, then hoping the venom doesn't kill him. Finally reaching the edge of the woods, he finds Will and Cassie and begs them to get his dad before he crumples to the ground again. When Dad shows up, Cassie says he got bit by a werewolf. Okay, now she's just stupid. That's not even a cliffhanger or anything. She just lied. After a little bit of time, Grady's got an ice pack on, and Dad also mentions that green snakes aren't poisonous, which doesn't matter, but I know he meant to say venomous, so that's good for Grady. Mom brings up Cassie and all the werewolf talk, and despite Grady thinking she's an obsessed lunatic, he can't help but believe it a little. Mom and Dad don't believe it because they're scientists, and everything's got a rational explanation, and Emily hates the dog so much that she accuses him of being a werewolf. So we have a compromise. The moon will appear full for 2 more days, so Dad says if the howls stop after that, it's a werewolf. Haha, how funny, but little did they know something crazy was gonna happen. Will and Cassie come over for dinner, and they start arguing about werewolves again. As a professional third wheel, Grady doesn't get a single word in. At night, Grady can't sleep, and the howls begin again, closer and closer. Grady makes his way out the back door as he hears a crash. The howls stop as he gets outside. Searching the yard, he finds nothing and decides to turn back. But then he sees it. The werewolf has killed again. Grady walks towards the deer pen, a hole ripped in the side, and a dead deer laying on the ground. He screams for Mom and Dad, and Dad eventually appears to move the deer out and patch up the hole. Dad sees the paw prints on the ground and is sure that Wolf is a killer. He mentions having to take him to the pound, but Grady starts to freak out. He starts going on a whole tantrum about how it can't be Wolf. It's gotta be the crazy swamp hermit who said he was a werewolf. Realizing they're both too tired, Dad says they'll talk in the morning, and that's good enough for now. In the morning, Dad comes back from buying mesh for the deer pen to tell Grady that the whole town's been having animal deaths this week, and the wolf versus werewolf argument begins again. He has no choice, so Dad begins to reach for Wolf, but Grady tells him to run. Wolf breaks free and runs into the swamp. Dad knows he'll be back, though. This kid's gotten really attached to this dog. Wolf hasn't come back, so he lives for 1 more day. Nobody talks at dinner, and in bed, the howls begin again. Grady looks out the window and sees Wolf standing, growling towards the moon. And so, Grady decides to get dressed and follow the dog into the swamp, somehow proving he isn't the killer. Once he's outside, he's already lost Wolf, but he can hear him walking ahead, so he follows. But then, footsteps from behind! Grady spins around to see it's Will, who, despite being such a heavy sleeper, heard the howls this time and wants to investigate. They walk into the swamp together, and Grady tells Will all about the dead deer and how Wolf can't be the killer, blah blah. Will doesn't really say anything in response until Grady brings up Cassie, and he calls her a bitch. They find Wolf, and then they lose Wolf. Will knows the way, then Grady loses Will. Grady hears noises, but he doesn't know who's making them. He makes it to a clearing, realizing that he ended up at the hermit's shack. The howls begin, and Grady's like, yup, he's a werewolf. Frozen in fear, he knows he has to run, but the werewolf bursts out and tackles him, and this time it actually is the werewolf. Grady almost instantly recognizes that the werewolf is actually Will. Even under all that fur, you can tell his eyes are the same. He's too strong to escape from, and Will bites into Grady's shoulder. The pain almost causes Grady to pass out, but a loud growl wakes him up. Wolf leaps onto Will, and they start fighting. A shriek rings out, and Will starts to run, Wolf chasing behind. Will lets out one last cry of pain as Grady fades. Back at home, Mom tells Grady he has a slight fever, but he wonders how he even got back here. It seems the swamp hermit carried him back home. Grady keeps mentioning how Will's a werewolf, so Dad says he's going to get to the bottom of this. A little while later, Dad comes back and he's stunned. Will's house is completely empty, like no one's lived there in months. So Grady is like, Wolf saved my life, can I keep him? And even though this never really proved that he didn't kill all the animals, saving Grady's life makes him good enough for Dad. A month passes and Grady and Wolf are always exploring Fever Swamp. Sometimes he goes with Cassie, who's still obsessed with the werewolf talk. The first full moon since the incident comes and Grady begins to change. Yes, when he bit Grady, the curse of lycanthropy passed on. But he doesn't care. Now the swamp is all mine. Climbing out the window, Grady meets Wolf for some night exploration. Time to hunt. What a twist! I should have known the curse would transfer over. So many questions left unanswered, too. Is Wolf really just some swamp dog that looks like a wolf? Whatever happened to Mr. Warner? Will the swamp deer be able to live in Florida? Maybe not with another werewolf roaming around. This is the first time we get werewolves in a Goosebumps story, and it's more abrupt and anticlimactic than I hoped. It takes 3/4 of the book for them to be mentioned, the second to last chapter of the book to appear, and 2 paragraphs to figure out that it's Will. Not only that, but we have no clue if Wolf just killed him or what. The curse itself doesn't even seem that bad. Grady's having a fun time just going to the swamp and killing stuff with Wolf. The dead animals were a great use of imagery though, very realistically scary, and the tension was nice. I could see this being a book with a great adaptation. So let's see if the episode gives us just a little more werewolf action. As a special, Stein gives us a little intro on werewolves. We have an old country backing track over some establishing shots until we see this house, looking absolutely terrible compared to the book, which I assumed was just a normal house there. Emily finds a snake in the cupboard and Dad tasks Grady with taking the totally real snake, not a prop, out to the swamp to let it go. Yeah, that seems good enough. Grady gets lost pretty quickly, getting caught by the swamp hermit, but nothing happens. They just cut right to the bathroom and goddamn, this place sucks. Grady and Dad make some small talk, the deer experiment, not having friends, swamp hermit. We learn in this version his whole family's dead, so he's a little crazy and alone. Dad uses the deer as a comparison to explain how they adapt to their environment, and so will Grady. Not sure how he just knows the experiment's gonna work, so it falls a little bit flat. Nighttime comes, but literally nothing happens. Will Blake shows up the next day, and there he is. Not much else to say. Grady wants to play catch. Will doesn't do baseball. Will wants to shoot some targets. Grady's family doesn't do guns. So the swamp it is. Instead of explaining swamp fever, Will just makes the swamp seem like this mystical place that changes around you and makes you lost forever. So why not go in? Okay, now he does explain swamp fever, but this time the fever makes you want to go into the swamp. It's a 2-for-1 deal on swampy death. Something makes a noise, so Will is just like, get the hell out! They both hide from the swamp hermit, who isn't really doing anything. And Cassie must have been completely removed from the episode because Will is the one that accuses him of being a werewolf now. Family dinner happens, Emily complains about not having her own car, Grady talks about Will, the fever, the werewolves, the whole plot, you know. Cheeky reference to the haunted mask here before Grady wakes up in a cold sweat. He thinks he's got swamp fever, but I guess he's fine. He walks outside to see some rustling and runs inside. This last door is cracked open. Rah! The family takes the assumed attack from Wolf with no seriousness at all. They actually name him Vandal in this version, which is fine, much less confusing with the werewolf now. So this dog is adorable, and Grady has fun playing with him. In this version, Mom has a telescope, because not only is it a full moon tonight, but a lunar eclipse. In another trek to the swamp, they find some wolf's bane, and Will mentions that not only does that not actually work on werewolves, but silver bullets were just a psyop from the werefolk so that poor people couldn't hunt them. Then he dehumanizes them.
Werefolk? I suppose you'd call them werepersons.
Suspicious stuff. Grady takes a tumble and almost falls into the great old bog. Will has lost all of his realism in this version. Remember when he corrected Grady that the bog sucking you down like quicksand was a completely fake idea? Well, now he says quite the opposite. But he still sticks his hand in like an idiot. He pulls out a shoe and laughs at Grady. Honestly, in this version, Will's just a straight-up asshole. Vandal starts barking, and so Will thinks they're being watched. Immediately making himself seem more untrustworthy, he grabs the wolfbane he just said didn't work and is like,
Do you believe everything you hear?
Emily's actually the one to find the bunny this time, thinking it's cute, but then realizing it was dead. Despite this traumatic sight, Dad is dissecting the thing right on the table, and he's like, the bites are canine, gotta be Vandal. Nope, no other possibilities, not a chance, sorry. So instead of telling Vandal to run, Grady takes some initiative. Assuming the hermit's the murderer, he just decides to go talk to him, and I guess tell him to stop killing stuff so his dog isn't falsely accused and murdered. The boys stalk the outside of the shack until they get found, and Grady actually gets put into a net trap. He begs for help from Will, but as soon as the hermit shows up, Will chickens out. The hermit drags him all the way back to the cabin and just growls the whole time. He's just eating this turkey leg and staring at Grady, so Grady tries to intimidate him by saying,
They've got guns. Really big guns.
Doesn't really work. The hermit sees the full moon and just starts howling. Not the most convincing way to stop being called a werewolf, but it at least got Grady to leave, which may have been what he wanted. Dad and Emily are gone, and instead of being like, the hermit put me in a trap and kidnapped me, he just says that he's a werewolf. Vandal starts barking, and this crazy deer prop crashes through the wall, which is hilarious because none of the deer in the pen actually had antlers. And so this is when the deer is killed. All the other deer have scattered, so Mom wants to get Vandal killed and find the deer. Instead, Grady gets his chance to let the dog go, and he actually barricades his mom in the shed. So Grady goes to Will's house, which is empty, and Emily comes home, which is also empty. Or is it? Grady heads into the swamp, and Emily, well, I'll just let this speak for itself. So Emily goes into the shed to hide with Mom. The werewolf's using his max speed stat to fast forward the footage, and Grady's still lost in the swamp. The werewolf appears there too, and he realizes the net trap. The hermit goes on this whole monologue about how the werewolf killed his family, so he'll kill him too, but then he realizes it's obviously just a deer in the trap. Oh shit! So Grady runs as the hermit assumedly dies, but before he can get killed, the lunar eclipse blocks the sun, turning Will back into a somewhat normal wolf man. He tells Grady to run away before he hurts him, but he doesn't, so he gets tossed around like a football before Vandal comes to the rescue. Vandal pushes Will into the bog where he starts to sink, and I shit you not, this is how emotional he gets from the whole ordeal.
Thanks, boy. Poor Will.
Poor Will? Yeah, alright. So we have a nice family dinner to wrap it all up, and we get jump scared by a nightmare about the wolf. We see Will's bones come up from the bog for about 5 seconds, and then... Yeah, Stein's got a werewolf arm. Ooh, scary. Did you notice at any time during the episode that the werewolf was using bull noises? Absurd. This one actually leaves you with some different questions from the book. Like, was literally anything Will said about the swamp or werewolves true? Or why the hell is Grady howling at the moon at the end? Did he get the curse from nothing? Or is he just picking up the habit from the old hermit? Too bad that the swamp hermit died in this version. His vision was so poor he couldn't see a deer from a few inches away. Props to the show for still including a dead rabbit and deer, though, even if they weren't bloody or torn apart. Overall, not my favorite story or episode, but I could definitely see it scaring some kids, so maybe that's all that really matters. So, did you gain a fear of werewolves from your time in the swamp? Or did you just realize you should avoid Florida at all costs? Well, don't get too comfortable, because in 2 weeks we return to the mud for You Can't Scare Me.